Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back aboard for another episode of. Sorry, had to forgot to mute one of the speakers there, speaking out over the microphone. Welcome back aboard, everybody, for another episode of the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast. This is episode number 267 on a very long road trip from nowhere. So we're back again tonight to talk news, to talk about what games we've been playing, and we appreciate you guys joining us as always. Here with me, as is quite often the case, I have one of my co-hosts, Mr. DBQ Hams. How you doing, DBQ?
I'm doing pretty well. For a moment, I thought you had some type of sound drop of like a new show intro that you had worked up, like, thanks for joining us on. And then there's this pause, just waiting. And I was like, oh, what's going to happen next? But no,
So with most of the setups, I have grown accustomed, although it really bugs my OCD, I've grown accustomed to just accepting on blind faith that audio is coming out on the live stream. But actually, we were supposed to do another episode of the Infinity panel last night, and it wound up being a bust because I was running late. I was trying to get everything configured. I was like, oh, yeah, no problem. And I've podcasted from this workstation before, but I'd forgotten in a recent PC update. This machine actually used to be a gaming PC. I moved it to be a streaming PC, and I said, I'm not just going to slipstream it and slide it over. I'm going to actually wipe the operating system. And so none of my like live streaming software configurations, OBS and whatnot, had been set up. So I wired all the hardware, had everything set up, booted, what was I going to say? Started OBS, and like just a blank screen came up. I was like, oh, we're not podcasting from here tonight. So, so because of that, this time I needed to insert a very slight pause there because I wanted to actually make sure that I actually heard audio coming out, since this is the first time live streaming from this machine.
Well, I'm glad that it is working now. So, yeah, it should be a good show. I feel like for the middle of November, there should be some bigger games that we're talking about, but maybe it's the sheer fact that neither of us have jumped into Ragnarok might, reflect that as well. So.
Yeah, and I mean, it's as you said, it's November. Is the holiday season over? Sometimes, some years it is, and of course we're in the final, sweeps of run up to. I mean, Ragnarok, you would think would kind of be the last big swell of games that would be contenders for Game of the Year. And they are. I should say it would be the last big swell of kind of AAA, like big titles coming out that people would really be taking notice of. But there's another Need for Speed title on the way, which isn't going to make as big a splash, but.
And Marvel Midnight Suns is still coming in December, the much delayed game. But yeah, there are still some kind of odds and ends coming here late November. We get Pokemon this week or next week, so I'm sure Talmaster is probably going to be our Pokemaniac there to talk about his motorcycle Pokemon. But yeah, it should be. I've started to think about our end of the year superlative show and kind of going back through what I've played over the course of this year, thinking about what I've missed. And it feels like I haven't played as many AAA games this year as in years past, but it could be also that the quantity is different, right? Like, I think there's some of that, or maybe I've spent my time with a little more indie stuff than AAA stuff over the course of the calendar year.
I mean, I would say there's quantitatively less, right? And I'm a person who, a lot of people will wave that flag, right? There's fewer AAAs out this year, and first of all, AAAs are not the entire gaming industry, right? We fall down.
Like, in some ways, that's not a bad thing that there's fewer. Like, if things are taking longer if things are more polished as they come out, I mean, Gotham Knights might argue with that, but that if things take a little longer but come out a little better off for users and stability, or a little better off in terms of development end, that's not a bad thing. But yes, it does feel like yes, the quantity is less. Thinking about Black Friday holiday game sales, like what's going to hit that this year that are 2022 releases?
Well, yeah, there'll be a lot of 2021 games on sale, and and one of the things I've been looking at, like I've been thinking about the superlative show, and one of the things I've been, and because normally this year, one of the things that all of us tend to do is we tend to make a short list of like, oh, what games do we need to check out, what games did we start but didn't finish, and and need to go back and spend some more time with, and there's not, and so in pursuit of doing that, I've been crawling Metacritic, and Metacritic has its criticisms, but the one thing I probably said this year more than any year is like, look, Metacritic is a database. You can use it however you see fit. But the one negative knock that I don't feel you can make about it is that it's thorough, right? And so if you utilize it as a database and choose to sift through that data and draw the insights out of it for your own, uses and applications, then it's to me it's a great place to go, because it is the one place that more so than a lot of other sites tends to actually have all major game releases listed of any significance, and even the ones that are not of a lot of significance. I discover a lot on Metacritic by using my own kind of algorithm and sorts and filters to pick up and notice a lot of games that I wouldn't otherwise notice, right? So pulling through that list this year, it does not run as deep as it has in past years. And going through that list is where I'm typically often able to say, look, there's been 280 something games of particular critical note, right? I don't know that list runs as deep this year. The PC list of games that, is 80 or above is about in the 70s, I want to say. The PlayStation, even the PlayStation 5 list, right, which you would herald as like, the king platform that has the most big releases on it. I want to say that, if you can run down to about maybe the 80s before you run out of games that are, aggregate score 80 or above. And again, that's not the rubric that necessarily everyone uses, but again, to me, it's a thumbprint, right, of kind of where the industry is. So, that all being said, we're still finding plenty of stuff to play, I think. And unless there are other comments you kind of want to make on the state of the year, DBQ, we'll go ahead and dive into segment 1 on our main stories of what we've been playing on.
No, I think we'll have plenty of time to talk about games this year, but it's nice to be able to start to preview that a little bit and think ahead and kind of project out. So yeah, let's talk about what we've been playing.
Yeah, so I've been diving into Prodeus. I think I'm currently in a mode where I'm kind of revisiting my sifts and sorts of, of what I play. There's a story behind that, which I think we'll hit as we get into the news stories. But that has caused me to kind of lift my head up and look at some other things kind of around the landscape. And one of the things that I did this week in particular is I definitely spent some time plumbing Game Pass to make sure I was getting my value out of that subscription service, which, every subscription service kind of gets a turn in the barrel for that purposes. This week it was Game Pass. And so I went looking for a first-person shooter and kind of, wanted a first-person shooter. And I mean, I played a lot of things that were in that genre that weren't necessarily 2022 games. I played... I'm trying to make sure I don't want to go over anything that I actually have in the rundown. So shooter-wise, in addition to Prodeus, I played Quake, with the PC update this week. I played Wolfenstein: The New Blood. But the one I want to talk about tonight is Prodeus. Prodeus is clearly a retro game, clearly an old school style game that evokes a lot of, to me, it evokes a lot more of Doom than Wolfenstein. We kind of throw those games into the same bucket, but to me, they have, even like if you go all the way back, they have kind of some distinctive design differences. And this one speaks to me a lot more so from to Doom, in particular in ways in which it even mirrors kind of some of the same level of design as Doom Eternal. It is
The art style definitely looks more Doom than Wolfenstein-esque.
Yeah. It's a high performing title, so again, the graphics don't, it's not stressing any modern day GPU out. I was definitely cranking, 199 to 240 frames on the 240 hertz monitor I was playing on. I think I played this on a system with an RTX 3060, just a baseline, so you don't need too much muscle behind it. It's kind of weird. It's not a roguelike, obviously. It kind of has some weird elements where, like, if you pick up weapons but then you die after you've picked up weapons, then when you respawn, like, you don't have that array of weapons again, so you have to pick them up all over. Weapons do run out of ammo. It's not as, and there's no way to replenish it, right? Unlike Doom Eternal. So for all the knocks I give on Doom Eternal, for the way it kind of handles that and the way that sometimes can, bind you into corners on a particular level, so much to a point where sometimes you have to, or in Doom Eternal, you have to back out and just go back to an earlier save point. So it doesn't quite do that. There are some neat little kind of boss battles along the way, some interesting enemies, enemies that, I would say the enemies are sometimes ridiculously accurate to a certain extent, the ones that have the range. And there's no, I think the one major knock that I kind of have on it, there's no indicator of path. So the level design is incredibly labyrinthine, and it's very easy to kind of get turned and twisted around. There's a lot of, go down a level, go to this elevator, go up a level, go up 3 levels, which actually puts you, through a different vertical that winds up put you on a completely different horizontal plane, right? And so you do a lot of this, and a lot of times you just wind up kind of getting turned around and not being absolutely clear. Now, that being said, it does have a map and an auto map function. As you would imagine, those are things that I choose not to use. So you could probably make life easier on yourself. But like I said, it just kind of evokes a lot of that Doom. There's less of a I keep wanting to say Sam Wilson, but that's not what I mean. Serious Sam. There's less of it being kind of a running away shooter in the way that Serious Sam is, so that kind of makes it a little more interesting. The geometry of the level design kind of puts you in a lot of cramped spaces, kind of in terms of kind of in the way Destiny 2 does sometimes, and some the kind of underground caverns where, and then in Destiny 2, there's a ton of vertical space, right? But the point is that there's walls, right, and the space is confined, and it actually makes you fight within the geometry of the space. You can't just exit the space and go away, in order to persecute the fight. Now, if you need to take a break or if things go really south, this game does give you the ability to kind of pop out through a hatch and the enemies don't pursue you. Of course, I don't think there's any way, I don't believe this game has like an auto recharging health system to it. So, but, in terms of a lot of the kind of retro shooters that I've played over the last couple of years, Boomerang and Dusk, and some other shooters of that nature, again, Quake with the PC update, it definitely stands toe-to-toe with those, with probably slightly more interesting weapons, I would say, than some of those games. So, if you're a Game Pass subscriber and you're looking for a first-person shooter, you're not, you really dig on kind of those old school game designs and level designs, it's definitely something I think that's worth checking out.
Cool. Yeah, I had heard of this, but I haven't really seen it in action. So until I saw it up here on the agenda, so I took a look. Yeah, it looks very much kind of in that old school vibe, but with some, as you said, with some tweaks that keep it feeling a little modern, or at least give you different hooks versus kind of the straightforward 1997 FPS type of thing.
Yeah, different hooks. I wouldn't but that only goes but so far. Like it is very much a dyed in the wool, like 1990s kind of early 2000s shooter, without too much, beyond that. But again, if that's kind of a mood you're in and a thing that you're looking for, it's definitely worthwhile. So DBQ, you look like you've been going after a genre after my own heart, playing some kart racing, it looks like.
Yeah, so I think that these actually pair nicely together because this is also, let's say, it feels like, well, and I say this in a loving way, that it is late 90s, 2000s, in so much that there's not an online. So I'm playing Smurfs Kart. So Smurfs Kart by Microdes. They are a French developer. Actually, the publisher is Microdes. It is by Eden Games. Eden Games they have done the Gear Unlimited, the Gear Club Unlimited, the racing game on mobile, then ported to consoles. So they've got some chops in terms of racing here, and actually the racing is pretty good. It's a pretty good kart racer. I mean, it is a little simplistic in terms of it's not super visually flashy. It looks like it is reusing some of the assets from last year's Smurfs 3D adventure game, or 3D platformer game that I played and actually found it surprisingly good. And I'm in the same boat here, that I find this game surprisingly good. It comes out this week, and reviews go up tomorrow. So, but it's actually a lot of fun. It is $40 on Switch. It is only on Switch, which I guess kind of makes sense for the audience because it feels like it's a holiday gift for a kid, or for parents to play with kids. There's 4-player local co-op. You have probably 12 different Smurfs to play around with. You have 3 different Grand Prix, with 4 tracks each. There's a mirror mode. There's kind of your, they call it fun and speedway or whatever, in terms of kind of a 50 to 150cc Mario Kart kind of analogy there. And there's time trials, and you end up in the time trials. Each stage so there's 12 stages or 12 courses, and each one has a different Smurf that you're racing a ghost against. And so if you're trying to beat certain scores there, and those are pretty difficult. I mean, it definitely is. Now that I know who the kind of the lineage of the developer in terms of coming from pseudo arcadey realistic, racing game, right? With Gear Club Unlimited, it's not, getting under the hood, but it does have some good racing physics, and knowing your lines, knowing the courses makes a big difference. And the same is true here in Smurf Kart. Is like the first time I run through a track, it is, you don't know where you're supposed to be drifting in, and so the geometry is good. There's a lot of you get power-ups just like in a Mario Kart. They have different aspects, but it kind of all has similarities, that you've got something to drop behind you, you've got something that seeks out somebody else, you've got a speed boost, but they're all kind of in that nature vein that the Smurfs kind of fall in. So yeah, I'm surprised at how much fun. I've been talking to my kids about it. Like, this is actually a lot more fun than you would think. Like, and we've played things like Garfield Kart Racing and Nickelodeon Racer just because they're fun to play together, but they're also oftentimes a lot of jank in them as well, and not great controls. And this has that. I mean, it's got good controls, and it is pretty responsive. You also have the ability to do like similar to Mario Kart 8, where you can turn on the like auto accelerate or auto steer. So there's a real scalability for younger audiences, which again seems to fit with kind of who this is targeted at. So yeah, very enjoyable, surprisingly so.
So as you went through that, it evokes themes from Ollie Ollie World, to a certain extent, as well as Trackmania. So, did you feel any of that as you were kind of going through it?
Not the precision of Ali Ali World, where as you get further into that game, you really need to know, you know, hit those jumps and know that. The last couple courses do get, but if you slow down it, playing on the fun speed, things are a lot more forgiving. Playing on the 150 equivalent, you definitely need to have run those courses before. And so in some ways there's a whole unlock of stickers. So if you have some affinity to the Smurfs franchise, there's some fun to be had there. If you're a parent that's got littler kids and you kind of feel like you've, you know, ideally there's probably some more super, Mario Kart tracks coming in their track pass, but we haven't really heard anything. And so this in some ways fills a gap of kind of a family friendly kart racer for the holidays.
Now, did you play this year's earlier release, Chocobo GP?
Yes, I did play Chocobo GP. This does not have nearly the kind of microtransaction loot box hooks that Chocobo GP does. Chocobo GP leaned a lot into online play, where this has no online play. This is, I think the racing here feels a little heavier than in Chocobo. Different carts handled differently, but Chocobo was very, very light in terms of, even a variety of, it was a very kind of arcadey, and it's a kart racer, right? But it is, I would say if you're looking at 2022 kart racers, there's a lot more reason to look into Smurfs kart than there is Chocobo. And there really hasn't been, I think there's been another Nickelodeon one, but those have been hit or miss. So yeah, it's kind of surprising where it does feel like I can see why it's on Switch, because that's probably the audience that's going to play it the most, but it's also the audience that has Mario Kart 8 Deluxe sitting there probably installed on their machine as well. So what's going to pull somebody away from this versus that, rather than if you're a Xbox, PlayStation owner that it doesn't have a whole lot of other kart choices except for, race with Ryan on the Game Pass, right? Like, or there's a Paw Patrol one. And I would say I've tried both of those. Yes, I will fully admit that I have tried both of those, right? And this goes back to playing with my kids and like kind of laughing along with it. Those are licensed properties for kids that are in a pseudo, functional game. This is a very functional game with a licensed property. That's whether or not there's a whole lot of kids, although there is a Cartoon Network or a Nickelodeon show about it. But I think at some point there's also this, it straddles that sweet spot of there's some parental nostalgia potentially along with kid interest. And that's way more time on Smurfs Kart than I thought most people would ever have. But yeah, well worth it, I would say.
Very cool. The concept of the metaverse, right, gets a lot of knocks these days, but just as, we have some recurring themes, which we are identifying as having consumer value to them, right? Having a game that's on Game Pass or in the Xbox ecosystem, and that game extending your experience from being on your mobile phone and playing an Xbox Cloud Gaming, and then you can come home and then you can play it on your Xbox, and then if you're on the go with a gaming laptop, then you can play it there, right? That has value for some people. And in similar ways, as we go down this metaverse path, whereas, licensed IPs have kind of always been there, but the multiple ways in which people can access them on different consoles and in different ways, I think still makes a significant play today, and maybe even more so when, if there's a Smurfs cartoon, right, on Netflix or whatever, and kids can extend their experience, right, into a kart racer, right, that's significant, and when it's timely, that adds value, and that, can be an effective strategy, right, for gaming companies and IP holders, and we're seeing more and more of that these days.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's, one of the reasons why, or the reason why the new season pass for Marvel Snap is all Wakanda based, because it happens to be a new season the same week that there's a major motion picture release. So you want more Black Panther and Black Panther adjacent material? Give us $10 and we'll be glad to supply that for you. Right? Like, yes.
Yep. Let's go on to segment 2 of the show and go ahead and start with the news rundown. The first story up over on the PlayStation blog by Isabel. Oh, wait, is that right? Yes. Supposedly by Isabel Tomatis, VP for brand hardware and peripherals on SIE. I have serious doubts whether or not a VP at SIE actually wrote this article or had some minion write it, but we'll go with it. She's given the credit. How the PlayStation 5 brings Lakeshore to life in Need for Speed Unbound. And I quote, experience Need for Speed Unbound at 60 frames per second and 4K resolution on PS5. Feel every bump in the road through haptic feedback and immerse yourself in the world of Lakeshore, a street racer's playground. We recently debuted the reveal trailer for our latest Need for Speed. Unbound is an all-new high-energy installment from Criterion Games launching December 2nd, 2022. As teased in the video above, your goal is to reach the Grand Lakeshore's Ultimate Street Racing Challenge by taking on weekly qualifiers and outsmarting the cops. The article goes on to talk about some of the benefits of playing the game on PlayStation 5, but obviously one of the and it doesn't just talk about the controller, even though the controller is big. They talk about some of the advantages that you'll get by playing on PlayStation's architecture, including the CPU. They double down on the mention of 60 frames per second, 4K resolution. They remind you about the 3D audio, which I haven't decided what platform I'm going to play it on more and more these days, as we kind of talked about, because I feel like there's not a ton out this year. It's not unusual for me to play the same title on multiple platforms, and so but one thing I will say is the Pulse 3D audio. I think while the microphone on that headset has a little bit to be desired, I do find it enjoyable to experience PlayStation Pulse 3D or PlayStation 3D audio through the headset. And Need for Speed is a franchise that has typically done a good job with audio. And then it goes on to mention some some pre-order bonuses that you will get if you and I don't know if these are, I'm not going to call these as being available solely for PlayStation 5, but they are called out on the PlayStation 5's blog, so at least you'll get those there. You may get them on other platforms as well, but obviously playing the game with the DualSense controller is going to have some advantages over playing that game on Xbox or on PC with a different type of controller. Some third-party games will implement the DualSense controls and implementations on PC. There are drivers available for them now, at least through Steam, is my understanding. So you will typically expect, a game that has them implemented, if it's available on Steam, may have them for PC as well. I think all the EA games now are coming to Steam now that they've given up the Ghost on Origin. So this will hopefully be a good time, and it'll have those DualSense implementations.
So they've given up the Ghost on Origin, but there's still the EA Play launcher. But they are on Steam. And I want to ask a behind the curtain question here. So this is a post by the Need for Speed writer on the PlayStation blog. Makes sense to tell PlayStation specific things. How much of this is, we know that there's going to be a 10-hour trial on Game Pass because of EA Play. So from a marketing perspective, it makes sense to, what's the benefit of playing it on PlayStation? Haptics, 3D sound, that let's try to get some of that information out there to show some value on the other platform as well.
Yeah, it's a good move. I mean, that 10-hour time thing, I think it plays to a certain demographic of gamer on the market, and then there's a larger demographic of most people that it doesn't necessarily play to. and I think that dynamic is a good dynamic. I think that the people who seek something like that out and don't mind the additional kind of gaming administrivia overhead to like remembering and coordinating and making space in your schedule and yada yada yada. I think it plays to their interests. But then like the other people who are just like, look, I don't, like, people who don't keep up with all that, or they just want to know when the game is generally available. It's
right. They're going to buy it because it's another Need for Speed,
right?
And that's what they're looking for. Yep, yeah. That's a good point.
So, but then again, I don't know that between those two demographics, if either one is more likely to be on Game Pass than the other. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think EA's play with how it addresses its different market segments is EA doesn't care, right? It just wants sales on both platforms. The people who are on Xbox, right, are going to get into that trial if they're on Game Pass. The people who are on PlayStation, because there's only 20% of the market that has both. They're going to play it on PlayStation, right? They're not going to. So sometimes it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's, let's advertise to the demographic who is only going to buy it on PlayStation anyway, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Like, let's get that awareness out there for people on that platform.
Right. I think more so than a shot against Xbox and Xbox Game Pass. It's more a matter of let's make sure that, with people who are inside the PlayStation walled garden ecosystem, that there's eyes on a new Need for Speed, right? And that people don't pump the brakes and just, shrug their shoulders and say, hey, eventually that'll wind up on PlayStation Plus and I'll play it then.
That's a good point. Good perspective.
So over to our next story, this one over on Rock Paper Shotgun by CJ Wheeler. Microsoft's buyout of Activision Blizzard to get closer scrutiny from EU regulators. The EU's, and I quote, the EU's business competition regulators are deepening their investigation into Microsoft's planned $68.7 billion deal to acquire Call of Duty and Overwatch publisher Activision Blizzard. The intention to conduct an in-depth investigation was announced in a statement on the European Commission's website and will focus on how the deal will affect console and PC games along with PC operating systems. This means that both the EU and UK are now holding further investigations into the potential buyout of Activision Blizzard due to concerns that Microsoft's acquisition of the company could reduce competition with the games industry. I should also mention, so he called out that that the EU UK are moving on to a phase 2. I'm pretty sure that our own FTC has moved on. I should say it's more so the antitrust division, the ATD, has moved on to a phase 2 investigation as well, or at least has heavily indicated that they will do so. So this to me is not surprising. Again, you go back a few years before Brexit. I don't know that there would have necessarily been individual investigations by the CMA and the EU Commission. They would have just been one investigation underneath the EU, and that would have been applicable to the UK. So having, organizational DNA that has been shared over the last several decades, this doesn't surprise me. So one of the things that's different, and I read the actual EU Commission's original statement, not as interpreted by other websites, on their page itself. And a couple of the things that they call out are things that I keep mentioning to people to pay attention to, and why some of the bodies rule this way, and how they look at things that are not just gaming. And two of the things that they called out is they called out cloud. And the really super interesting thing was that they called out operating systems. And they actually talked about how, and they didn't really come out and say it. So I interpreted it based on kind of how they constructed the argument. To me, it's a bundling argument, right? It's a, look, if you have games and you have super big AAA titles, and on top of that, you have Game Pass and the Xbox ecosystem, and then you own one of the world's largest operating systems, and you bundle all of that together, right? This is a crowbar that can be used to leverage, right, anti-competitive behaviors against other operating systems. Now, I say, well, what other operating systems does Microsoft compete with? And you could argue that they compete with OS X or Mac OS, which is not really seen as a gaming platform, and mainly because Apple doesn't really support it as such. Games come to Mac OS by happenstance but like, I don't know that you would ever talk to a developer who's like, I've got to make my game compatible with Mac OS, because it's a huge market over there, because there's not. But there are gamers who would play on it, but I don't necessarily know that this gives Microsoft the leverage to do that. One thing that will be interesting to see as it comes out, if they do put additional verbiage behind that in a finding, is you now have the Steam Deck. And the Steam Deck is gaining momentum. It's very small still. There's only like a few months ago, I did some math based on some things that Valve said, and I calculated that there were only like 120 something thousand of those out in the wild. But I think the other thing that the Steam Deck does, it's a knock-on effect in that it's creating awareness of the viability of playing games on Linux. Now, again, you're playing the Windows version of the game, so you should be careful that I'm not saying playing on Linux. You're not playing a Linux native version of the game, which even myself I found some disappointment with. But that is also, causing additional consumer awareness, causing awareness amongst the geekdom that's a viable alternative to playing on Windows. And in fact, I would even argue, if you're looking at a budget build, first of all, AMD's Radeon cards, in my opinion, play better on Linux than they do on Windows. And while card prices and PC prices are just kind of like out of control, it's a very viable option to build a Linux box, throw a Radeon card in it from the 5000 series generation, or even now that they're about to be superseded by the 7000 series cards, a 6000 series card. You're running cards that are, competitive at scale against NVIDIA. They're not better than NVIDIA cards, but they're good enough that the reduced price that you'll pay for them are absolutely worth it. You're not going to be spending the additional $100, $150 on the Windows operating system, and you're going to have compatibility with a large number of games. Now, if you're trying to go after certain games, you're going to have problems, right? You're going to have problems playing Destiny 2. You're going to have problems with anything that is probably, a big multiplayer get, because the problems where the Proton abstraction layer runs into is in accommodating some of these kernel level anti-cheats. So you're going to run into problems with that. But if those games aren't in your bailiwick and you're not worried about them, to me, that's an incredible cost advantage that you can, and so as people gain awareness of that makes these free distributions of Linux or SteamOS itself viable alternatives to Windows if you don't need to be running Windows in your house. And it'll be interesting to see if they come out with any verbiage around that. DBQ, your thoughts on the EU's pickup?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense at this point. Everybody is kind of giving multiple passes at it, kind of not just giving a rubber stamp to it. And it also just geopolitical makes sense. Like if the UK is taking a stance and looking into it a little more, in a harder line, as we've talked about here the last couple of weeks, it makes complete sense that the EU is going to try to have some parity there as well.
The EU is out to get Microsoft and any of the big tech five. So there was no look. There was no way they were getting through this without a second look, by any means whatsoever. Talking about another of the big five, this article by Chris Holt over on Engadget. Google starts issuing Stadia refunds. If you've ever bought a game on Stadia, Google's soon-to-be defunct cloud gaming service, it's worth keeping an eye on your bank balance and credit card statements. As of today, Google is starting to process refunds for Stadia purchases. The first wave of refunds will include those for purchases of games, add-on content, and subscriptions made through the Stadia store. However, the company is not refunding Stadia Pro subscription fees. I think
I got my email. Yep.
So you got your email because you've purchased games through Stadia?
I purchased both games through Stadia, and I purchased the hardware through the Google Store. So I purchased the technically looking back at my, I purchased two games because I purchased NBA 2K21 and Cyberpunk, and with the purchase of Cyberpunk came the controller and the Chromecast. So I don't have any reimbursement coming from the controller or the Chromecast as a unit, but I do have the $60 reimbursement coming from Cyberpunk.
Yeah, that's very awesome that they're doing that. Google has killed off several projects before, as we well know, and not gone down the path of refunding people's money. So this is I would almost say unprecedented, but I'm not absolutely certain, so I won't use that term. But it is definitely not the norm. I got an email, but the only thing I ever did was bought the Pro subscription.
You bought the controller though, right? You bought the hardware.
Well, yeah,
so that would still be the refund that you would get. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Where you piped up with that information before I asked it, because I was going to ask about the hardware. There was no mention of the hardware refund in my email, so I don't know if that's a thing that's coming later. They talk about here as they're doing it in waves. Hardware is not mentioned, which is why I was going to ask you, but your hardware refund may have gotten drug along with the other purchases that you made.
Yeah, I think that's the case. But the press releases and the language do say that hardware, if purchased through the Google Store, is coming. So, but it makes sense that it's probably in waves because this is supposed to wrap up early in January, I think is what they were projecting.
Yep, and I did buy mine through the Google Store. I think I'm not certain. I gotta go back and look. I'm not certain if I bought two kits. If I bought one and then when I dropped Stadia initially, or I had the problems that I had with Stadia with some of the back end stuff and dropped it. When I know that I bought the Founders Edition. At a later point, though, I think I bought a Chromecast Ultra. And I can't remember if that was when I re-upped for Stadia or what. So I may be getting refunds for both the Founders kit and the Chromecast Ultra, but I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember exactly how I purchased that. But it's good. It's very interesting that this is going on, and it may be why they're doing it. They may be doing it because they haven't entirely dropped this notion of cloud gaming. They're shutting down Stadia, but they are also making a big push for gaming in the cloud on Chromebooks. And they're doing some of that in conjunction with Valve. So this might very well be a goodwill thing where, and then, the problem in the question or the shade that people always threw at Stadia was like, look, they're asking you to buy this Founders Edition thing and this controller and blah, 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 and Chromecast. I was like, okay, no, really, they're making that available. You could always do Stadia without buying any of that stuff using your own equipment. But this pushing Chromebooks potentially makes a thing where people who already have Chromebooks and already have, Xbox or PlayStation controllers don't need to buy any new equipment and may be able to then experience it. And then that may encourage them because Chromebooks are fairly replaceable and disposable equipment that, I don't know that anybody really blinks too much of an eye at upgrading frequently when needed. And that may be a market that is willing to make the jump to a more powerful Chromebook, in a couple of years if gaming on it becomes really viable. For people who don't want to invest, $1,500 in a gaming PC and maybe also don't have a console, or they do have a console, but they also want a way to game on the go, right, when they're away from home. So the Stadia refunds may be a goodwill move, right, to not alienate people who might also fall into that market demographic. Next article is about Halo Infinite by Cameron Woolsey over on PC Invasion. Blood Gulch makes its way to Halo Infinite thanks to the Forge community. DB, I'm sorry, did you have anything else you want to mention on the Stadia refund article?
No, I think we covered it, and I'm sure we'll come up again once we both get our refunds. So, yeah, let's talk now that we get this week or last week with the Halo update with Forge and online co-op. So, go ahead, take the news.
Okay, like I said, this over on PC Invasion. Well, that didn't take long. Less than 2 days after 343 Industries finally launched Forge mode into beta, creators have already begun doing what the developer hasn't, as spotted by Eurogamer. Blood Gulch, the iconic and famous map introduced in Halo Combat Evolved, is now in Halo Infinite, thanks to a Forge creator. The creators shared some images of the map, which is currently still in progress, as well as a link to download it. The winter update dropped, and one of the positive things that it brought was lots of new maps available via Forge. I dropped into the winter update Forge, and again, I would say I'm still a Halo outsider, at least from a legacy perspective. I've spent a ton of time with Halo Infinite, but I spent that time not having all the background and familiarity with the legacy versions of Halo multiplayer. So going into Forge, it still appeared to me the kind of confusing mess that it always had been, where it seems intuitive to me that the way to implement it would be, and maybe it's there, or maybe I just didn't find it or understand it. It would seem to me that there should be a way for you to just pick some number of the top most popular Forge maps and put them into your Team Slayer rotation, but it doesn't appear a way to make those things cross over. And so to play a Forge map, it appears to me that you have to play Forge, or play in the Forge. And Forge is, I don't know if I'd really describe Forge as a mode, but when you're playing Forge maps, you have to play Forge maps. And that's I don't want to do that. Like, I would like to utilize Forge maps as a way to augment the other normal maps that I play. I don't want to play Forge maps as a isolated vertical of a rotation. But that was the information. I don't know.
Do you get XP from the Forge maps? I mean, does that count towards your daily XP missions and things like that? Or is that because it's separate and it could be cheesable, that in order to hit your daily goals, you're still playing ranked modes and general competitive modes?
That's absolutely possible. I didn't play on Forge maps, so that's the thing. And again, I get it. Look, I know that there's a legacy and a history behind it and a reason why people love it. I didn't love it before when I casually approached Halo. I didn't see anything that makes, because exactly. I mean, the reason why I play Halo Infinite, or have up to this point, has been to chase the progression path. And if the progression path isn't something that you earn against when you're playing Forge maps, that is yet again another reason why I just wouldn't play it. Unless it's a Friday night party night like we used to do with Casual Adult Gamers, where it would make sense. But that's a thing, I guess, but it's not. It's not my Monday to Thursday thing. So I don't know. Have you had a chance to drop into the winter holiday update, DBQ?
Just a little bit to poke around at Forge, but I haven't played anything at all yet. So definitely glad that the online co-op is there. Trying to, the local co-op is still not there yet, but I think this in and of itself gives me a reason. I only dabbled in the campaign and kind of set it down until I knew that I could play with other people. So I've reinstalled it this week, actually. So
reinstalled it on Xbox or PC or both?
On Xbox, but now that I'm thinking about it, it may be a PC install as well, and that may be the workaround for my son and I to play. Is I'm playing and he's playing over my shoulder on the PC while I'm playing on the TV. So
very cool. And is it 4-person co-op?
I believe so. Yes.
So the story behind this for me is this is the week where I've bounced off Halo Infinite.
I was surprised I didn't see it on the playlist. So now I want to hear this story.
So look, I'm sure I've offered strenuous philosophy that chasing the battle pass and chasing the unlocks and chasing the skins shouldn't be the reason why you play a game. They're an adjunct, they're a nice to have. But the core reason why you should play a game is you love the mechanics and the gameplay, gunplay specifically. Halo Infinite, I don't know. I mean, it's probably a game that, because of its limited content, probably for me, probably the math equation for me in how it achieved its value, was leaned heavily on those unlocks, right? Because there's not a ton of additional maps. There's not a ton of LTEs and LTMs, limited time events and limited time modes. They're there. They're not there in the degree of proliferation that they are in, say, a Call of Duty, or some of the other, first-person shooter games. And really, right as I've been, playing across that landscape, I play Apex in arena mode, but it's not my favorite. I played Fortnite. I had a strong interest in solos for a very long time, and then kind of backed away from it, just because it wasn't giving me what I needed. Battle Royale just doesn't give me what I need in terms of a time efficiency quotient, right? It's a lot of time. It's like playing golf, right? It's a lot of time spent for very few moments of enjoyment. Of the height of enjoyment, and so I'd really kind of settled into Halo Infinite and Call of Duty, and and so here's the winter update. It's put there because there was a delay in Season 3, and the first unlock in the winter update is the Mark V armor, which I dare to say most people playing Halo Infinite already have, and I'm like, why is that there? And then I thought back about it, and I was like, okay, I guess you start with the Mark 7 in Season 1, and you earn the Mark 5 very quickly. And maybe there's some chunk of players out there that for some reason didn't unlock the Mark 5. Maybe if they didn't play the Season 1 Battle Pass. And maybe if they didn't want to activate the Battle Pass, right? Because you have the whole thing of like, if you activate it, you could always activate a Battle Pass forever. But when you do, you're earning only against that Battle Pass and not the others. And maybe this was a way to get people to Mark V who just didn't want to go back to activate their Season 1 Battle Pass. Or maybe new players who didn't have the Season 1 Battle Pass. I don't know. But for those of us who did and did that work already, why did I play my first hour and a half of, hour 15 minutes of 4 matches to earn an unlock that I already had? And my thing was, okay, if you're going to do that, okay, but then maybe make that an armor core kit so that those of us who already have the Mark 5B armor get some kind of special, unique, outfit out of it. And like when that, and so when that happened and I saw the unlock, and granted, like, you could put part of this blame on me for not reading ahead and blah, 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 and doing all this stuff. But my philosophy, like, I'm not spending a bunch of time Googling something. I should find something. And so when that happened, I looked at it and I was like, wait, isn't that an armor core I already have? Like, and then they gave you, like, everything that you were given with it was all common items. So there were no rare items. There were no, like, elite, like, it was all just kind of, like, they gave you like an armor core, I forget what they're called. I want to say shaders from Destiny 2, but coding that I'm like, I'm pretty sure, like, you are also already. So that happened, and I literally, like, I just kind of sat back in my seat, and I was playing on PC. I sat back in my seat and just kind of stared at the screen and kind of drummed my fingers and just kind of thought for like 5, maybe 10 minutes. And I was like, I don't think I'm down with this. Like, and then I looked at like the rest of the battle pass. It was like, and then all of the criticisms that admittedly everyone else has been mounting against Halo Infinite, which I've said, look, they're trying to make you play for a certain amount of time. They're trying to not give you like geedunk kind of cheap unlocks. Like, I get that. They're trying to make it so that you can't progress the battle pass just by playing Team Slayer. I get that, like, that entertainment ethos. But this, like, just finally kind of hit my point where I was like, I'm looking at the stuff to earn, and then, like, again, like, these common criticisms, like, so I gotta, like, shoulder plates, I have to unlock them twice. I have to unlock one for left and one for right. That's a really cheesy method to, like, really keep me engaged. And then they only added the one map, I think, to small team battle rotations, right? 4v4. And it's a really cheesy, horrible map in my opinion. With its kind of two islands almost with jump ramps between them, where literally you can snipe right the other team with battle rifle from the. So I just hit my point where I was like, what am I doing, sinking my time into this? Like, I've had a really good time Battle Pass season 1 and season 2 Battle Pass chasing that, but I'm like, that was a couple hours a night, right, for very frequent weeks of solid runs. I mean, look at how many times it was on like my game rundown list for this show. And I just finally hit that point. I was like, I'm not doing this for the winter update. Like, they've made some quality of life improvements. They've finally fixed the horrible UI thing, which was when you used to unlock challenges, it would bring up the challenge, it would say that you completed it, and then it would just flip to challenge complete. So if you didn't catch it right when it came across, you were like, I don't know what the heck I just completed, right? So all of these things that I think have been grating other people just finally kind of hit my butt, and probably because I had been so accommodating of those things in the past, like it just hit that apogee and just went straight into a nosedive for me, and I was like, I'm done.
So if you're done there, did that pull you into Modern Warfare 2 a little bit more, or did you devote your game time that you would have been kind of climbing through a battle pass to going back through and exploring, like you said at the top of the show, some Game Pass stuff, other things from the year? Did it just kind of take you off that treadmill, or did it stick you on a new treadmill?
It had the effect of taking me off the treadmill, and it kind of had, when I was lock wired into Star Citizen, and when I came off that, I was like, I'm done with Star Citizen, but I want the same thing. I don't want games that I spend 15 to 40 hours in creating a build that I just walk away from. I want these games where I invest in them and I stick with them for a couple years, right? And I'm ready to become that gamer who just runs that circuit, right? Destiny 2 goes to Warframe, goes to Call of Duty, goes to Halo, right? I lived that lifestyle, but actually, when the Halo Infinite thing happened, I was also kind of down and negative on Call of Duty. The UI implementation, I was really dissatisfied with the way in which the unlocks had been rearranged with the weapons platforms. There were some good things there in terms of some of those unlocks being transferable across weapons platforms. But I think you and I both mentioned it was like, but the game's really grindy. Like you can smell the grind now, and season 1 hasn't even started. And there was, if you want, there's, missing content, right? In terms of like there not being a hardcore mode, and they're not being kind of map specific, like, and things that are coming, but things that I guess, in the past I have not been one of these people who jumped on the bandwagon about, things that should have been there day one. But I definitely was starting to kind of feel that about Modern Warfare. And again, I was kind of in a, what am I doing? Right? I'm going to sink. Like, I need to be careful here because I'm probably going to start running very quickly into being hypocritical. But, Call of Duty, it's really hard to tell. The weapon platform thing, I think I would normally think of that as an improvement, right? That appeals to a certain kind of player. I love my complexity. I love how, to me, the weapons platform thing kind of raises the floor on the old unlock paradigm and kind of lifts it almost to a simulation kind of level of the way you kind of manage inventory and parts, right? In a deep simulation, a flight sim or a space sim. But it's really hard to tell if that's a design improvement or that's a on-ramp to microtransaction lock-in.
That's a good point, right? Like that's a fine line between where you lose the shoulder of the road and yep.
And the reason it's tough is it's tough to tell how they're going to lean on it when they go into the seasons. And what I worry about is that it creates. I mean, because what it does, it creates planes for additional branching, right? Of progression paths, and it's feasible now for them to put things on a progression path that can lean on bad game design tendencies, like forcing you to play a certain thing that you don't really want to play in order to unlock down a progression path on a weapons platform, where that path has an incredible creative competitive advantage because something down that path is just super buffed, right, and overpowered in terms of them maintaining weapons balance. So, it's just tough. But at the end of the day, the dissatisfaction that I had with Halo Infinite just caused me to kind of pull back and not only feel like a what the heck am I doing moment epiphany about Halo Infinite, but also about a lot of the multiplayer, right, kind of competitive shooter things in the way, like we've always said, they occupy a lot of their time. I'm always jealous to a certain extent of Tao in his view of gaming, where he says, there's time for both. And when he says that, what always echoes back to me is like, no, there's not, right? It's like, what is my, I see the games that are out there and like, I don't have time to go put 40 hours into that if I'm over here trying to progress about a thing. And I see that when it unfolds in reality, right? That, there's just not, and then, with those competitive shooters, you're also trying to maintain proficiency, right? So when you do a long layoff of Halo Infinite or you do a long layoff of Call of Duty, there's a hit, right? It takes you sometimes a night, right, to kind of get back up to your level, sometimes 2 nights. Then so yeah, it's, as of right now, I see myself falling off that train. Halo Infinite is not uninstalled everywhere. It is still places where I can play it, a little bit each week without being obsessed about the progression path. Call of Duty, I think right now, is uninstalled everywhere. So we're just going to see if, based on kind of how I'm doing my new kind of gameplay algorithms, whether or not it pops back up, we'll see.
So, well, we'll see what is on your playlist next week with season 1 starting with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. We'll see if you get the itch or if the hype train catches you. But I think this conversation around the grind of battle passes and multiplayer shooters leads us nicely into our final news story of the night with Battlefield 2042.
Very nice segue. Battlefield 2042, by an article by Luke Plunkett over at Kotaku. Battlefield 2042 joining Game Pass, getting free weekends. And I quote, Hi, this is Kotaku's Luke Plunkett, one of the 17 people on the planet regularly enjoying the game, reporting live from Battlefield 2042. If you haven't played the game during its first 12 months, and really it has had problems, who can blame you? EA has decided that now is the time to try to convince you by offering Battlefield 2042 for free during the first few days of December across all platforms, or at least as part of the subscription fee you're already paying for Game Pass. So I'm having a hard time tracking now. Is it coming to Game Pass, or is it just people who have Game Pass can play the game for free for like a limited time on a weekend?
So it is coming to Game Pass, and then with the release of the new season early in December. And then at the same time of the new season, there will be free weekends across platforms. So PC, PlayStation 5, because there was another story over on a PlayStation related story about it having some free weekends coming up with the new season. So it is both, that it will be part of EA Play on Game Pass, and then the free weekends will be for people that don't have Game Pass or on a different platform. But all kind of launching with, they haven't given a specific date with the new season, but the target is early December.
Right, that's it. So yeah, so that's a good point. You know, it's on Game Pass, but you will still get a free weekend on Xbox for people who are not on Game Pass. That will be December 1st through 4th, and then it'll be free on Steam December 1st through the 5th, and then a free on PlayStation December 16th to 23rd. Now that's not perma free. That's free for that limited time, and then after which, you know, if you choose to buy it, you know, then you'd be on board. I don't know. I don't typically play free weekends. Typically during those free weekends, is the game also on sale?
Yes, usually that's pretty consistent that it'll be heavily discounted at that point in order to kind of convert people that have enjoyed their free weekend with a steeply discounted sale. So, yeah, and actually, I mean, it's not that it needs to be a super discount at this point because it looks like there's a lot of sales on Battlefield 2042. Again, it came out last year, did not set the world on fire, had a number of bugs and issues, had some challenges in terms of player retention, had some challenges in terms of kind of, they've abandoned, well, I shouldn't say that. They've refocused some of their modes, right? Like they had 3 different major gameplay modes. They've kind of shut one of those down to funnel people more into some of the others. They've stopped resources on some of those. Again, not necessarily a bad decision, but much more of a resource supply chain decision in terms of how much time and how big of a team that they can devote to this. So I want to cheer for Battlefield. Right? Like it has struggled for so long that I would say it's struggled probably since Battlefield 1, the World War one, which really seemed to nail things. That this is, it would be nice that if this gives it a second life. Although I will also say, I'm really surprised it took this long. Like, given the player counts, given the struggle in it, like pushing it into EA Play, pushing it into Game Pass, and trying to convert people on the Battle Pass, seemed like that was a smart play back in March rather than November, December at this point.
So the thing that's weird to me is, Battlefield 1, which I would contend when Battlefield 1 initially dropped, it was not seen as successful as we look at it today. And I'm going to come back on how we see it as successful today.
I think you're right, because Battlefield 4 had such a strong population and they were kind of still running them concurrently. Even in the launcher that they added on afterward, still had both of those in there.
And it was a big paradigm shift, right? It was the war stories approach, and then there were a lot of changes to multiplayer, in the whole shift in setting, right? Taking it back to the World War II setting, which there were lots of reasons that they gave players with Battlefield 1 to be sketchy in terms of how they were going to approach Battlefield 1, and then I want to say, and I'm not positive, but then I want to say during its runtime of its primary life cycle, I don't know that they cranked content as much as people were expecting.
I don't think so. I mean, there were some maps that came with the pass. I think in some ways Battlefield 1 feels successfmore because what came after it wasn't so much. And that Battlefield 5 going to World War II and having some more issues and stability issues. And yeah, I think that in hindsight, it feels stronger because it was stable.
Exactly. People were not up on Battlefield 1, but because Battlefield 5 was worse, all of a sudden we now look at Battlefield 1 as being successful. In fact, things that made people cranky about Battlefield 1 that were taken out of Battlefield 5, people realized that the Battlefield 1 way was better. And Battlefield 5 definitely suffered from insufficient content, cranking it out at even a lower rate than they had on Battlefield 1. And now we have Battlefield 2042. So, and along that whole way, we also had Battlefront wait, yeah, we also had Battlefront, which also came out with a lot of anemic content. And as far as I was concerned, because I had never been interested in Battlefront before that version, then when I got in and tried playing the dogfighting, right, the dogfighting approach, just to me
Yep,
was
in
very
Battlefront 2, yeah.
yeah, it was just very watered down and diluted, and I was like, I don't know why anybody would want to play this. And then you bring Star Wars Squadrons along, and I'm like, this is what space combat should be like in Battlefront 2. So you have 4 iterations of titles that have not done what they needed to do. Like, are people clinging on to the memory of Battlefield 1942? And look, when 2042 came out, it was one of the highest played games on Steam. And I'm like, that's a paid game. People aren't getting that for free, right? So I'm like, is it just the memory of Battlefield 1942 and I guess the first Battlefront that people keep clinging to these games?
I wouldn't even say the first Battlefront. I don't think that was seen very highly either. I would say that the Hope Springs Eternal aspect of it is probably the Battlefield 1942 player base has probably aged out to some degree, right? Like, I think there is a population in the 360 early Xbox One where you have Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 really felt like a strong combo. Like, DICE was building towards something. Like, they had evolved. They had each of those two iterations were stronger than than what had come before it, and it felt like they were on the ascent. And this is another interesting, right? Like, that also kind of coincides with how many other EA studios fell apart in the early teens, right? Like, the collapse of BioWare kind of coincides with the descent of DICE. It happens at the same time as Visceral is shut down shortly thereafter. Like, there's potentially a larger corporate structure here that is at play, along with, or at least influencing DICE's direction. Or they just ran out of good ideas, and gamer taste has evolved. I think that was one of the conversation points that was happening last year about this time when Battlefield 2042 was about to release, was in a battle royale, free to play kind of battle pass progression landscape. Where does the kind of traditional big player battle, slower time to kill, maybe streaming aspects of it all, where does Battlefield live in that landscape? And I guess I don't know that they've been able to answer that. And that's the me cheering, like, oh, maybe they get a second shot at another second bite at the apple here. But I don't know that they've figured out the identity of that game any stronger now than, it's not like Battlefield 2042 2.0. Like, there's not a big relaunch of this. But maybe this is, yeah, it does sound like they're bringing some classes back that were in other previous games. They did a lot of, they had some really good ideas with the, I don't remember what it was called. It was not the Forge mode. It was not the sandbox, but it was like the Portal mode where you could pull in the different, the kind of pull on those nostalgic strings, which I think is, which we just said is kind of all they have the ability to pull on to some degree at this point.
Yeah, the weird thing is, I mean, to me, the best things of like the last 15 years, right, out of DICE were Battlefield Bad Company and quite frankly the war stories, right, for Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5. Like, I had much more fun in the war stories as a unique approach to a campaign than I did playing the multiplayer. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to segment 3 and wrap up the show with our rundown of our regular round robin, and we'll kind of do these a skosh rapid fire. And I'm also going to scramble the order, so prepare for heavy swells as the ship comes about, because I didn't do that before in the agenda. The first thing I'm going to talk about is one of the things I played down again as I move away from competitive first-person shooters was Total War Warhammer 3 on PC. As I have been ensconced in that other genre, I had definitely fallen off of RTSs. I've only played through the initial prologue in Total War, which normally I don't bother with prologues in games, but because it's been so long since I've played a Total War game and so long since I played an RTS, I did go down that path this time. I will say this game has reviewed pretty well, and I found less enjoyment than I expected based on those reviews that I saw. It's kind of interesting. On GameIndustry.biz, one of the I can't remember exactly what position he had on the team, but one of the people selected for BAFTA's like their best and brightest they have like a best and brightest like creators incubator program where they offer like mentorship and promote and training, right, for some of the best and brightest for screen entertainment, right, around the television, movie, and video game industry. And one of the team members from the Total War team was selected, who was one of like the design leads or something like that. I want to say he was maybe he was the animation lead or something like that. And like the character model, right? And like the character models in Total War Warhammer 3 are exactly one of the things that I found to not be that I wasn't super impressed by. I expected to see, I was playing it on a 2560 on a system with an RTX 3080 Ti. I was just expecting to see a heck of a lot more detail and fill in kind of the on-screen character models, like when you brought up the hero characters and things, and I was like, I didn't like these. I didn't see what I was kind of expecting, nor did I see what I was expecting kind of on the battlefield, right, in terms of expecting kind of more intricate character models down on the battlefield in RTS mode. The story is fine, and this is probably, normally I play an RTS probably more so for the mechanics of the combat, but this time around I'm actually spending time with the story, and it's the more impressive. It hasn't moved a lot beyond Total War 3 Kingdoms, which I think was a 2020 or 2021 title, but not seeing as much as I wanted to see in the title in terms of graphics and animations and texture maps that are placed over the character models and things of that nature. But again, I'm playing in the prologue, so maybe we'll get better as I progress. This was a game that was in Game Pass, so I was glad that, first of all, I was surprised to see that something like this was in Game Pass, but I guess that's part of an arrangement with Sega. But looking forward to spending some more time in it, and hopefully things will get better. DB, you want to talk to us about...
Let's stay on the Game Pass train then and
Sure.
do Vampire Survivors. So going back through looking at releases this year, this is on the list of things that I have not touched yet. That has gotten, it's kind of a small indie game, but it still keeps popping up in bigger news outlets as a real strong title for the course of the year. So it just came out on Xbox console this week, but for some reason, every time that I try to launch it, I keep getting an error message. So it's been on PC on Game Pass for a little while. And so I played it there, and I haven't spent a whole lot of time with it. I know you played it a little bit at some point. I thought you had talked about it over the course of the summer, that maybe you had dabbled in it. But it is, I'm enjoying it. I'll be really interested to see if it is one of those where it's like, I'll just one more run, right? Just one more time. It's the auto battling aspect of kind of making your way through the landscape, the roguelike elements of it, the old school graphics, the kind of 8-bit soundtrack. I'm enjoying what is there. I have not spent enough time only a few runs in to see if this is something that actually kind of grabs me and holds on, or if it's just like, oh, that was fun to dabble with, and it was a good Game Pass type of game.
Yeah, it's not. I have not played Vampire Survivors. The game I played, I think that you're thinking about was V Rising.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is the one. Yes, V Rising, because that was a more survival one. Yep.
Yeah, kind of again, kind of in your MMO survival, online, PC game. That probably cuts a lot closer to like kind of maybe Rust and some of the things that the Towmaster plays. But I gave that a try. Didn't stick with it. But you want to also talk about your.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Before you go into that, what is the hook to Vampire Survivors? Like, why play it?
I think the why play it is it's a roguelike. It's got, I think it plucks at some nostalgia strings, but it's a roguelike in kind of a unique way that most other, roguelikes are either going to be a lot of times modern, they've been things like Hades where they're isometric, things like Dead Cells where they're, platformers. We've seen roguelike racing games. We've seen roguelike beat 'em ups. We've seen a little bit of everything that has a roguelike take on it. This is, as far as I can tell, you auto attack, and as you're kind of weaving your way in almost like a bullet hell-esque through the map, collecting, trying to as you level up, you get additional attacks. You get a holy book like in Castlevania, or axes or spears, or different types of weapons that continue to have different frequencies of auto attack. So you're timing those as you're moving around trying to survive, and you rank up as high as you can with that run. And then as you earn gold, and that gold can then be used as long-term equips in terms of your character progression. And so some runs for me, my first run was like 4 minutes. I could see if a run could, I would be really impressed and I haven't even dug into Twitch to see how long some of the runs could be, but I'm sure as people get good with it, those runs can be really long. But it feels satisfyingly bite-sized, but also enough layers there to give you a reason to keep kind of coming back for the progression.
Okay, and how's your other game been going?
So this week, the game that I was really looking forward to over the course of the year, which is the Tactics Ogre Reborn, Tactics Ogre, the remaster and re-release of the mid 1990s game. I have the PSP version of it. I think that was probably the last physical Prima guide that I purchased. And this came out on PlayStation, PC, and on Switch. And since I owned it on Vita, I just couldn't justify dropping $50 for it. So I went looking for some other type of tactics game. Live by the Sword Tactics is the game that I picked up. It's a isometric turn-based strategy RPG. It's done by a small little studio, Labrador Studios, out of England. It relatively inexpensive, similar type of battle mechanics that the Final Fantasy Tactics Ogre have. And one of the things that I've been making, the story seems relatively short, not a whole lot. Again, it's a small team, small piece, but one of the mechanics that I'm enjoying that's different from the rest of the genre is instead of, your characters don't level up. And in some ways, or they do within the course of the battle, but not over the course of battles. So oftentimes what happens in a strategy RPG is you end up having a small party that you stick with because they've out leveled everything else, or you have to keep rotating in or do some grinding. And in some ways, because of not having a leveling system for the character, it made it it made it a lot easier to swap in and out characters. So I was trying different combinations of things, and that in itself gave it a different tactical approach, because you weren't trying to, you hadn't min-maxed your way through each battle, that you could kind of change the board up and try some new tactics with a whole different set of people. Even if you're going through the same battle, now because of the characters you have to approach that battle differently because of the skill sets and weapons that they have. So, again, Live by the Sword Tactics, it's on Switch and Xbox and PC. And if you are a strategy RPG fan, it's a relatively cheap price. I'm sure once we get into holidays, it's going to be on sale again. Again, another bite-sized type of game that is worth it for people who enjoy that genre. And you've got one more Game Pass game here as well, right?
I do. And so the other game that I chose to check out this week was Chorus. As you could see, one of the things I was trying to do in the background there was play the game with one of my flight control systems, the Logitech GX52, X52 Pro flight control system. Venerable flight control system originally made by Cytec. And that model has continued to exist as part of the product line with, refinements and iterations for many years. I ran into this kind of same problem with, I can't remember what the name. There is a game called maybe it'll come to me. We'll see. Not Starship. I think it's Evo. Maybe it's
Eve Valkyrie. I mean, that was a.
Nah, it's
another flight. It's another stick game.
Yeah, maybe it's Evo Space. There's
Yes. Yep, that is a game.
There's been two of them. Because it may not be Evo Space. Everspace, that's it. Which is kind of a roguelike space sim, which I have a strict no roguelike policy, but I gave Everspace a try because I figured, well, maybe the space sim aspect of it would make me more interested. And it did make me absolutely more interested than I would be in any other roguelike, but not enough for me to stick with it. And Chorus, is kind of a game in the same vein, not with the roguelike elements, but just in terms of kind of being a space sim light. Which we've kind of had that eroded from the industry over the last few years, and so. But I tried to check it out, and my interest was only sparked because I saw an article that talked about HOTAS support coming to the game. I guess it wasn't there at its beginning. That's just, look, I'm not going to play a game like that on a gamepad or with mouse and keyboard. The only reason to play that game was because of HOTAS support. The HOTAS support is bad. It's I played it on PC. It does things like when you plug the HOTAS in, the mouse cursor goes away, and so on things like the game option screen as you're trying to configure the game, the mouse cursor is still present, but it's not visibly drawn on the screen, and so you will see, menu items kind of highlight as if the mouse is passing over them, but you can't see where the mouse is. So, I was able to kind of jankily kind of get around some of the configurations that I wanted by kind of watching when a menu item highlight, and it's not a slow highlight. Like the mouse quickly passes over it in a frustrating game of kind of whack-a-mole to try and get it centered on the screen. But I was able to kind of, mess around with that, and then also kind of, with the keyboard kind of maneuver around to make some changes. But that's a technical flaw. But then on top of that, like, it makes some design weirdisms. Like, it chooses to show the icons for buttonology on the HOTAS with like slightly differently nuanced like graphic icons. So like it has a 1 with a circle around it, but then it has a 1 with like a exploding icon around it. And I'm like, well, which one is that? Like, is it the one on my throttle? Is it the one on my flight control stick? And then sometimes they do the same thing, right? So I'm like, what is the point of the difference in the iconography? And so it just makes it very, then some of the powers that you trigger, it does some things like it will map a control to a button, but then hitting that button like doesn't actually render that effect. It winds up rendering some other effect that it says is mapped to some other button. Like it was just bad. And I see the potential there, and there's almost enough there to make me interested in playing it with a gamepad and a keyboard, but just not enough. Like look, the reason to play a game like that for me is to have, is the feeling of being like the space fighter jockey, and like when you can't do that. I mean, and I mused on that for a few days, right, where I was like, maybe I'll go back to it, and I was just like, no, I think the bad hostess support to me is kind of unforgivable. And this is, World of Warplanes, right, kind of did this, where like there's a really great engaging game there, from wargaming.net, particularly for somebody who likes playing flight games, right, and but just the unreliability and instability in HOTAS support, right, and forcing me to do that with a keyboard and mouse, like I'm just not doing that. So it's unfortunate. I think there's kind of a B level / C level story there, for gamers who don't have that kind of obstinate predilection that I do. We'll probably find something enjoyable there. It from an artwork perspective, it looks great. It doesn't necessarily implement the most advanced graphics, but again, my yardstick for that is like a Star Citizen, and so let's not necessarily be that ridiculous. So the game looks pretty solid, and other than the control interface, has a pretty decent flight model that I could see. But again, the lack of HOTAS support or the kind of wonkiness in HOTAS support definitely makes me back off of it from that perspective. But good bones there, I think, for people who want to go down that path of checking it out. DBQ, anything else that you think you want to go over?
No, I think we've hit our time and then some, but lots of good discussion. A lot more discussion about the news than I expected. I thought this was going to be a slow week, but a few layers to pull back there.
Yeah, it's another very common thing we say on this show is as we get into this point of the year, we're like, the news is going to dry up and we're just going to play, the year's releases and kind of, do some good wrap up as we go into the superlative show. And number one, there's, as we said, I don't know that there's enough to play to warrant us having a lot of makeup homework to do to prep for the superlative show. And every year, these companies do things to get themselves in the news cycle, not always in the best of ways with their best foot forward, that keeps us on the news hamster wheel until December 31st. Then at least maybe sometimes people tend to go on vacation. That seems to be the only way to keep some gaming companies from putting their foot in their mouth is to go on vacation.
Right, that week in between there is usually a little slow. So, but next week I'm sure we'll have plenty more to talk about.
That we will, and for that show, I think I screwed that up. I will not be hosting next week. Somebody else will be, I'm pretty sure.
Somebody.
We'll figure it out.
Chances are somebody will be hosting. So stick around, come back, check us out. We'll be here.
Absolutely. We will definitely be doing one more rundown before we're off for Thanksgiving, I think is the way the schedule lays out. So please join us for that. For anybody who happened to swing through the live stream, we appreciate you. For anyone who happens to come by and watch the archive version of this live stream on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, we appreciate you as well. Please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever we post new content. Until next week, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like. Come here to talk about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Hamp from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, here with my co-host, Mr. DBQ Hams. Until next week, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.